Thinking of doing intermittent fasting? Well, in today's video, I'm going to tell you the pros and cons of intermittent fasting that you need to know before you start. Let's go. Hi, I'm Aleksa, sports dietitian nutrition coach. Great to have you here. Welcome to my channel. So intermittent fasting is one of the most popular dieting regimens in the world right now. The premise is that the fasting has this effect on the body that makes it a superior health and fat loss solution. Well, this is not actually the case. And if you want more information about intermittent fasting, after this video, click here and watch the next video where I tell you more about intermittent fasting. But today specifically, it's about the pros and cons of intermittent fasting. Every diet has pros and cons, even the diets that are solid. So without further ado, let's get into them. So we'll start first with the pros. Number one, the first pro is that it can help reduce mindless snacking. When you give yourself parameters of when you can and can't eat, then you are less likely to snack out of those times, because when we give ourselves those rules, we tend to stick to it more effectively. But honestly, then you have to still think about the sustainability of what you're doing, because rules are only as sustainable as you make them to be. Pro number two is that it can help, for certain individuals, it can help kind of dial things down when it comes to hunger and satiety cues. Essentially creating awareness around hunger and creating more awareness around satiety, rather than just eating based on habits, whether they're good or bad. Number three is that it can increase your level of fullness within a set level of calories. But obviously you still have to have calorie adequacy, because that's important as an athlete for your fueling purposes. But even then, let's say you just have 3,000 calories. If you're eating 3,000 calories in a smaller window, you'll tend to feel fuller in that smaller window. And that, for some people, can be something that they desire. And that is, I guess, technically a potential pro of intermittent fasting. Number four is that it's reasonably customizable in its execution, in that sense that every intermittent fasting regimen can be tailored to some degree to your preferences. It can be tailored to be very unique to you. But then obviously you have to consider, are you doing a correct intermittent fasting regimen? Are you being too strict? And things like that obviously play a big part. But technically, I just want to share that a pro can be that it is quite customizable, and there are different ways of going about it. And then finally, pro number five is that really it's easy to implement. There's a low learning curve, and you just kind of set yourself parameters of when you can't eat, when you can eat, and you go ahead and eat what you want. That's kind of like the usual way people do it. And because of that, I guess that's technically a pro if people feel like dieting is overwhelming and they want something that's very easy. But at the same time, because of that low barrier of entry, you also have to be cautious, basically. You have to be cautious that you're not doing it just for the sake of doing it, just because it feels easy when it's actually not right for you, or doing it in the incorrect way. But technically, it is easy to implement because the execution is quite simple. Okay, so now that was the pros. Now let's get into the cons. Because as I always say, it's important to know the good and the bad, what you need to do, what you don't need to do, things like that. So it's important we go into the cons, because this could be the difference maker. Con number one is that it can be used to suppress your hunger cues beyond what you should be doing. As in, if you are naturally hungry, that may mean that you actually need a fuel as an athlete, okay? But if you're suppressing that through the use of intermittent fasting, just so you can lose weight, and especially on low calorie diets, like very low calorie diets, that is a big issue that I find with intermittent fasting. It becomes this tool to suppress and go beyond your physiological boundaries for the sake of fat loss. It's just something to consider, because your natural hunger cues, they're important to understand and not necessarily ideal to push beyond them and just suppress them for the sake of suppressing them. A bit of food for thought. Con number two is that over-restriction is very much an issue in the intermittent fasting space. A lot of people do intermittent fasting incorrectly and therefore end up suppressing their appetite, or suppressing the calories more so with their diet. But just in general, sometimes people would just be going, oh, I'll only eat in a 3-hour window or whatever. And like they just become very restrictive with their dieting. And it is a big risk factor. Therefore, it is a con that needs to be shared. Con number three is that, quite frankly, is despite the fact that it's so popular, despite the fact that when done correctly, it can be a viable enough tool in your toolbox. It's just not sustainable for most people. Most people don't enjoy being told you can't eat beyond a certain limit when they want to just be able to eat it. Certain people won't be able to sustain certain regimens when it comes to intermittent fasting because they don't align with their lifestyle. Just to give you an off example, let's say that's something that's just part of your life that you enjoy is breakfast with your family, but you set yourself an intermittent fasting regimen of 16-8, you start at 12 o'clock is when you start eating, you eat till 8, and then you stop and then you fast. Well, then for you, there's going to be a point where you go, well, I want to have breakfast with my family again. And then that's just something you have to consider. Then maybe you can do a different regimen, or you just don't have to do intermittent fasting. Because if you watched my video before, or watch it after today's video, of course, is you don't need to do intermittent fasting to lose weight. You don't need to do intermittent fasting to get success with nutrition. It is just a tool in the toolbox. It's not a magic solution. Okay, another food for thought. Number 4 is a big one for athletes, and that is that intermittent fasting is not an optimized dietary regimen for recovery, as well as for the purposes of muscle growth. So if you're trying to recover and have good nutrition from a recovery point of view, intermittent fasting does have some limitations, even though you can still achieve good success with it in that regard. But even from a muscle building perspective, while you can build muscle in intermittent fasting, of course, if you've got the right things, the right calories, the right protein, the right exercise, all that sort of stuff, you can obviously still gain muscle. But it's just technically, it's not actually not viable, but it's not optimized for muscle growth. Okay, so it's just something to think about. And from a recovery point of view, if you wanted an example, let's say that you've got a event coming up on Monday and you'll go to it again the next day. But let's say you can't recover after a certain time, and so it happens you finish your game and you don't get time to eat enough for the next match. And then maybe the next day you don't eat until 12 o'clock and your game is at 1 o'clock. You don't get optimized times for recovery. That is something you have to consider as an athlete when you start to do something like an intermittent fasting regimen. And then number five, the final one, is that at the end of the day, a lot of times people go to intermittent fasting, but they forget to understand that calories still dictate. And that's a con, because the way that intermittent fasting is presented, and I guess it's not intermittent fasting's fault that it's presented in the incorrect way, but it doesn't present the idea that you still have to be in control of calories. And you very much need to be. If you're trying to lose, let's just use weight loss, because most people who do intermittent fasting these days is for fat loss. Let's just use that as an example. Let's say you're trying to lose fat and you need to eat 2,000 calories and you're doing the intermittent fasting regimen. Cool, you still need to be 2,000 calories under to lose the fat. You can't be intermittent fasting and be like, oh, now I'm gonna eat 2,500 and break yourself out of that deficit zone. So just things like that you've got to consider. Intermittent fasting is not the kind of a superior solution for fat loss. It's simply a tool in the toolbox to help you control your intake if you need to use something like intermittent fasting. But even then, for athletes, there are better ways, and you still got to understand that calories at the end of the day, whether you track them or not, will still dictate whether your body composition is A or B. So there you go. Now you have a much deeper understanding of intermittent fasting, and understanding of what's good and what's potentially bad about it, and what implications this can have on you as an athlete trying to reach a peak potential. I hope this has helped you make a more informed decision around your nutrition and lifestyle. So tell me in the comments, drop a comment below. Are you currently doing intermittent fasting, or are you thinking about doing it? Just let me know in the comments below the details of what your story is. And now, before I let you go, I just want to say, as always, if you want me to personally help you, okay, if you're looking for a sports dietitian to kind of walk you through all this, kind of take out the guesswork, help dial down your nutrition and give you a bespoke, customized plan just for you to help you start leveling up your food game, as I like to say, and start getting better results, regain your competitive edge, and start treating nutrition like a serious part of your lifestyle. Well, I do have a 90-day coaching program, so if you're interested, the link is in the description notes below if you want to apply. Otherwise, if you want to ask me more or just, apply through email, you can send me an email at aleksa@theclimbdietitian.com.au. We'll have a chat, see if it's the right fit, and go from there. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date. And of course, as always, ring that bell so you can get a notification whenever I do. Like this video? Okay, like this video if it has been helpful and helps you give a better understanding around intermittent fasting. Stay classy. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.